Okay. Welcome to Investing Across Borders. I am Lauren Cohen, your host, international legal and real estate expert. I am originally from the beautiful, amazing, fun, exciting city of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I now live in the even more beautiful at this time of year location of Boca Raton, Florida. And a lot of Canadians, like the lovely Glen Sutherland, who we have on with us today, have ventured in investing across borders. Now, many people, as we know, have invested across borders just because they want to buy a vacation home, like in Florida. That's a very common reason. But others, like Glenn, have gotten into the have found the opportunity to invest in U.S. real estate to be much more lucrative, much more appealing, and in many ways, much more available than investing in Canada. This is becoming even more relevant and apparent as the Canadian market is really out of reach for most investors. When Glen is outside of Toronto about 2 hours, and what's the average property value there, Glen?
I think it's like probably 600,000. A house that should be almost torn down is at least 300,000.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because my mom through this whole COVID has been trying to talk me into moving back to Toronto. And I'm like, well, where would I live? In Toronto, those $600,000 houses are probably about 1.2 or 1.5 million. And a tear down at 500,000 is just a commonplace. Right. So you can't even touch the Toronto market. Literally can't even touch it for under 600,000, and that's at a low little tiny shack type house in the outskirts of the city. So people in Ontario, particularly, which is both Glen and my home province, and in other provinces as well, but particularly Ontario, have just found that the U.S. market is so much more lucrative. So I'm going to let Glen introduce himself. We actually met on Facebook, I believe, and something like that. And we became fast friends, as I do with many, many Canadians. And Glen is working on his visa. I hope that that's public knowledge. And if it's not, okay. So Glen is in the midst of working on his visa. And he's actually an amazing testimonial to why I do what I do. And we'll talk about that a little bit, about some of the obstacles that Glen has met in the process, and why the process isn't done yet, and just talk a little bit about how to make that process simpler and more streamlined for people going forward, which is really what I'm about. So Glen, why don't you introduce yourself and say hi?
Sure. Well, I'm Glen Sutherland. I'm the host of Canadian Investing in the U.S. It's a podcast about teaching people how to invest in the States, as well as just interviewing people who are doing it, just to give stories. I think people connect with stories, especially newbies, like first properties. People feel more comfortable when they see other people going through the same thing. So it's just a good little community to teach people how to do this and learn some of the advantages of going to the States.
Correct. And what is your background outside of investing in the U.S.?
Everything, I guess. Background in computers, background in accounting. I kind of do that kind of stuff as well. So it is, the accounting is complementary, but I'm not a CPA. I have like a diploma. So I still hire a CPA to do everything because I want it done properly. But I can't understand everything, and I can, do bookkeeping and all kinds of stuff myself. But in all honesty, you don't want a second job. You would prefer to hire a professional to do all this work.
Hire a professional. That's the message. Absolutely. So, but having that ability to read numbers and understand numbers is certainly a big plus when it comes to investing in real estate, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. Well, it is a numbers game, right? It's a numbers game. And then even for purchasing, especially, and then understanding the ongoing and understanding where problems are, and being able to do like a return on equity analysis every year, which a lot of people forget about doing that calculation. That's why I keep bringing it up, is that a lot of people have properties that have appreciated a lot, and now they cash flow much better because rents went up, but they're always forgetting about how much equity is left in that property. And at some points it makes sense to sell the property because your opportunity cost is sunk in that equity in that property.
Yeah. Tell me, when you first started investing, were you investing in the US? What were you doing?
No, I started like most people in my backyard. So the first ones I bought some in Waterloo and in Kitchener, which is like the 2 hours west of Toronto. And I got really big into the Cambridge market, and I bought a bunch of duplexes, some townhouses, a bunch of stuff like that. And that's how I kind of went with that. And how the story goes is that I had a tenant that was excellent, and they moved they're moving a couple hours away, and and sorry,
it's okay. It's COVID. We get it. I mean, dogs, kids, like
yeah. But so they moved a couple hours away, and during that process, I thought, hey, have you bought a property yet? And they said no. So I bought them a property to live in. And so they were a great tenants. So they've done incredible work to that property over the last, I don't know how long we've had it, 5 years or so. And, but whenever I got used to like being that far from my property, and I listened to a lot of, well, if you go back 5 years ago, podcasting was mostly dominated by, at least real estate podcast was dominated by Americans. There was tons of American shows, so I listened to American shows, and that's what got me into the market. And I thought, you know what, this isn't that different than the Canadian market. There's a couple intricacies that you have to work your way through, legalities, taxes, financing. But yeah, once you got past that, you can just jump right in, and you can take advantage of some of the advantages they have, right? Absolutely. In the States.
And there are a lot of advantages, like being, I'm not sure if you're even aware, but I'm partners with a Canadian company out of Calgary, and we teach real estate investing. Specifically in the Canadian model is agreements for sale. So one of the things that we noticed, and here in the US, that comparable model is called subject twos. And the challenge is that a lot of American, like you were saying, it was so heavily dominated by Americans. My partner in Calgary originally invested with an American company in the US that had no understanding or concept of how your US investments would impact your Canada Revenue Agency and all of the tax issues and all of that. They just were like, here, this is how it works. Invest in the US, have a nice day, right?
Yep.
And that's the same thing, kind of like you, that turnkey US model, which has no concept of how does that turnkey impact your Canadian everything? How does it impact you as a Canadian? And that's a very big challenge, and part of why I started doing what I do, because I am Canadian and American and a lawyer in both and a realtor down here, and can really help to navigate that. Because at the end of the day, for example, you know what a 1031 exchange is, right?
Right.
And 1031 exchanges, for our listeners that don't know, is when you take a property and you sell that property. It's like a tenanted property. You sell the property and you take the proceeds and invest them into another property within certain time frames. You identify the property in 45 days, you close in 180. Okay.
And you never touch the money.
You don't touch the money. It just moves from one property, it can also move from one property to two properties, as long as it doesn't go into your pocket. And so the challenge is that anybody, no matter what country you're from, on paper can qualify for that 1031 in the US. So lots of Canadians would say, oh, great, I can get that. And they can, if they're set up properly through a corporate structure, but most are not. So they would be told, oh yeah, don't worry, you can invest personally and qualify. And they can qualify, but then the KCRA disqualifies it. So it becomes moot, and it's a total disaster. And that's a very common thing. It's also very common for people that are investing in the US to not have proper tax advice. And when you don't have proper tax advice, you are going to deal with a big tax bill. Whereas why are you developing this business, right, Glenn? Like in the US, if you want to have a huge tax bill, that kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So
tell us about your experience with that, and how it kind of you modified your approach
for the taxes.
All of it, just the whole thing of like, okay, I'm a Canadian investing in the US.
Yep.
This model doesn't work. Let's modify it. How do we make it work?
Yeah. So financing, I guess we'll go into first. Financing, one of the big things, in all honesty, it's probably, unless you're dealing with one of the Canadian banks, which is going to be, if you're going to deal with them, it's going to be state specific. So you can't just go, oh, I'm just going to use TD everywhere in the US, because that doesn't happen. They all lend in certain states, and they're picky. So, and the thing is, you're going to still be, if maybe one of the reasons you're going to the States is because you got bottlenecked because, oh, your debt service ratio got out of whack because of these rental properties and some other things aren't working well. So the Canadian banks aren't going to lend to you. So going there and then using the Canadian banks isn't going to get you any farther ahead. So you got to prepare yourself to ideally work with some hard money, some brokers, some banks down there. So if you want to work with them, in most cases, it's not all cases, but you're going to want to have a corporate structure, because then you're going to can get around some of the Fannie Freddie stuff, and you're going to be getting corporate loans or foreign national program loans.
Right.
You're going to be working into a different area, because you're going to call off the start when you're rookie. You're going to call around. You call Bank of America. You call the biggest banks, and they're going to say, no, we don't do that, right? Yep. So you're going to be working with these smaller banks, and you're going to have, ideally, you're going to be, if once you get smart about this, you're going to have a corporate structure. And people go, oh, I don't want to have that expense. They're not expensive to set up these corporate structures. People got it blown in their mind. I know some people go and set them up themselves, and they're like $200. I would not recommend that.
No, please call me, please.
Yes, I would get a CPA or an attorney to do it for you. Then, because there is intricacies for having it as a real estate corporation compared to other things.
Yep.
And I'm sure, I don't do it myself, so I'm sure there's some intricacies to being a foreign national to it as well, because even to get our EINs, which is like the tax ID number for a corporation, if you're an American, you can go to the site and it'll give it to you in like 5 minutes. Yeah. Whereas
it comes Canadian, right there online, you're done.
As a Canadian, it's not like that. You can wait like usually about a month, but now with COVID, it's like 2 months or more to get your numbers. But go backtrack to the financing part. So once you have you're loaning to a corporation, sometimes depending which kind of lender you're using, a lot of hard money lenders are going to be dealing with foreign national programs, and they're going to do asset-based lending. So it's not based on how much money you personally make, how much debt you're carrying. Although some of these things can help your interest rate if you have very low debt, you have lots of money, it can help you. Really high credit score in Canada, some of them will pull credit score in Canada, some of them won't, some of them don't care. Right. But you're going to do asset-based lending, so it's going to be based on how that property is performing or will perform. The better the rate will be as it is performing rather than how it could perform. Yes. So the more boxes you can check as good things, the lower your interest rate will be. And that's one of the advantages to partnering with someone who's already doing this, because one of the boxes is going to give you your experience, and that's a big box. So they're going to be scared to lend to someone who's never done this before. Yeah. For them, it's a scary thing. You're out of country. It's a non-recourse loan, which non-recourse means that they're not coming back after you. They're coming after that corp, which the corp may only have that property in.
There's no assets, right?
There's nothing there, right? You could empty the corp out. So the risk is a lot higher to them. Yeah. So by partnering with someone who has the experience, they can see, oh, this person has more skin in the game besides like a down payment. They have these other properties. They are building a business, and they have been performing on other loans and notes and stuff like that. They can check history on other things. So I don't know, that's basically financing is where I would go with that. Some of the reasons to even go into the United States, I made a couple quick notes for that one. The lower taxes, which you touched on. People don't realize the difference, because a lot of times you're looking at your balance statement or balance sheet, and you're just looking your cost. If some of these costs are phenomenally lower, like you're paying like $500 a year in property taxes instead of like $500 or $700 or $1,000 a month. It changes things a lot in your bottom line. Lower
even
cost
land transfer tax, right?
Yes.
I mean,
that's an Ontario
thing. Transfer tax in Ontario is literally out of control, and if you're in Toronto proper. So you can pay $50,000 on a $500,000 home, and if you're in Toronto proper, it's double that. So think about, I mean, here you pay like literally babkas to transfer property.
And people have asked me that when they first property down there, I don't see land transfer tax in your sheets. There's not in there. And I'm like, because it's a made up tax in Ontario. It doesn't exist in other provinces even. They just made it up. And for some reason, Ontario's people are not upset about it. They're like,
it's crazy.
Please take a whole bunch of my money every time I change properties. And then tax me if it's a rental property, and then tax me as a capital gain on top of that, because we don't have 1031 exchange.
Just keep on taking money, government.
And we're all okay with it.
Right. But, well, because, anyway, we get free healthcare. So that's, it's all a balance.
You're paying for it in different spots.
You are paying for it every day, yes.
So low taxes, low entry of cost. And that's not totally true. It depends where you're investing. If you're like in the Midwest, oh yeah, I've picked up properties for $8,000, $5,000. And people go, you can buy a property for $5,000. You can't even buy land. You can buy a gas station land that's completely contaminated in Canada for $5,000. So
and then there's
lower
tax
cost.
deeds, there's all, and now there's going to be so much inventory because of all the subject twos and the people that aren't paying their mortgages down here. It's just a completely different market, and it's 10 times the size as well, which is another factor. And
that's one thing I didn't have on my list was the tax deeds and the tax liens, because people don't realize. And foreclosures, it's not the same as foreclosures in Canada are not the same. Foreclosures in Canada sell for market price.
Not here.
No, not in the States. You are usually, there is the odd one that slips through that's a little expensive, right? But you should be getting a discount, right? No matter discount. Yeah.
And again, these properties, these opportunities, these distressed properties, the market is really opening up for them because people are not paying their mortgages and they're starting to call them in.
Yep.
And it's going to be a big problem. And the bank doesn't want the inventory. The banks don't want the inventory. They want you to buy those properties. So they are they're going to be selling them at pennies on the dollar oftentimes. And
it's already started. I am already starting to negotiate some short sales where what a short sale is, people are going to sell their property for a lower price than what's owed on the property. And people go, well, that's insane, because they're in a hot market right now for real estate. The market is doing really well. If you want to sell properties, it's a seller's market. So you can do very well. And people go, why does there short sales exist? It's because people just got themselves in bad situations, high leverage, and then borrowed on the house and stacked loans on the house, and they can't keep the payments up. Is sometimes the case. And so there is abilities to do that. So you can negotiate with the three-way with the seller and the bank and come to an agreement where the bank is willing to take a loss to get someone else to buy it rather than trying to sell it on the market, because it's cleaner. And they don't have to go through all this stuff. I'm guessing is why they do it. I'm more on the other side. So I see the advantages for me to get a property at a discount. So anyway, we went way off topic. So there's a bunch of good ones there. Landlord laws, but that's state specific. So everyone, you can do this in Canada too. There's certain provinces, New Brunswick, Alberta, better laws, right? But for Ontario. No, Ontario is a very tenant-friendly province. And one of the biggest mistakes I see for Canadians going to buy properties in the States is they pick another tenant-friendly state. And I always, why are you in that state? I try to be polite, but why did you decide to invest there? If you're going to go across the border, why not pick the best you could possibly pick? Why pick something that's going to have similar laws to where you are now? But if you're curious, like, how do I figure out which one's good? I did a podcast on it, but even still, if you want to just Google it, just type the top 10 landlord-friendly states. There's your list. Yeah. Right. You want top 15? They go, and some of them there's a lot of middle ground where it's just like the evictions are 30 days, like a lot of the states, but some of them are really fast. If you're Texas, Georgia, Florida, Michigan, you can go very, very fast evictions in those ones. And then you can go into the Midwest, which is mostly, the 30-day evictions. And there's different intricacies. Every single province or every single state all have different things, but do some very slight research even before you go and buy in the state. No, because your property likely running with tenants, there's always stuff that can go wrong.
Yes.
You want to be buying where you're going to have less problems if things do go wrong. You want it in your advantage.
Are all of your properties buy and hold, or do you sometimes just buy and flip?
I do. Right now, I think I have more than half of my renovations right now are flips.
Okay.
So I was in all buy and hold mode, or buy, renovate, and refinance and hold, right? And I was in that pattern. I just kept buying and I was collecting and collecting. And after a while, you have a lot of work, and you're like, I got this cash flow, but I never really got like the payday, right? You don't get the chunks of money.
Right.
And all honesty, I read a book.
Properties as well, because it opens up, right? It's like gambling. It's just the same. You keep on replenishing.
Exactly. So I wanted to have now money, middle money, and end money on every deal. So a great way to do that is like a rent to own, which would be a land contract or a lease option. So you'll get a down payment for the property, that you have an exit because you have a predetermined selling price. You get a cash flow that's higher than a regular rental cash flow. And often you can take the repairs and put it onto the tenant, because they're not a tenant, they're a leaser. So it's a little bit different because they have a contract to buy. And so there's some advantages to doing stuff like that. I also like the mixed strategies, right? You don't want to be like just all buy and hold, because first of all, your money's gonna get stuck unless you're doing a burr. So some burrs.
Let's stop you. Most of my listeners are going to know. Tell us what burr is.
Just what I was saying a second ago. Buy, renovate, rent, refinance. Sometimes you can refinance before you put the tenant in, and then repeat. But but you're basically, what the purpose is you want to be buying discounted properties, buying problems, putting a renovation, or creating value. So it doesn't actually mean, it might be like our favorite ones are adding a bedroom, converting an attic, converting a garage to a bedroom and a bathroom, because then you comp out against other things.
Right.
Or you buy dilapidated houses and then you fix them up. That's a lot longer process, higher money, but stressful. But what you want to do is basically move the value up on these properties, so that whenever you go to refinance, ideally you want a perfect burr, which would give you all of your money back, so that you have all your money to go do another deal. And it cuts your cash flow down because you've leveraged up, not technically high, but compared to your purchase price, you're way above it. You want like your purchase price and your rental, all that money back. So you're higher than that. But if you would have just bought the property and kept it, technically you cash flow more, but that gets back to that return on equity thing, where you have a lot of equity left in the property. What you really want to do is strip the money, the equity out while you're in building phase, and keep stripping it out, buy more properties, expand. And then once you have a cash flow that's close to what your goal is, then you might want to start paying some of them off and deleveraging. But to get up to where you want to get, you really want to have to leverage. And I would honestly say you want something like lease options or flips mixed in, so that you have big chunks of money. So if you wanted to buy, say, popcorn houses, which are like little cheap houses that cash flow like crazy, but you can never put a mortgage on them. So there's $20,000 houses in the Midwest, but they rent for like $700 or $900 a month.
Right.
You never put a mortgage on, but you'll sink all your money in if you buy all those, right? You'll eventually run out of money. But then maybe with the deleveraging, you can buy some of those, and it's a little safer, so that you have some sort of, it's not
balance.
Bring the leverage rates down, make yourself more comfortable, make yourself be able to sleep at night. But that's basically what you want: now money, soon money, and then future money. And if you get into only one of those categories, if you're doing all now money, which would be flips, then you have a job. You've just exchanged a job for a job.
Right.
And if you have all like later money and some cash flow, you're going to be like,
stay in your job.
Yeah, you're going to stay in your job. You're going to keep working there forever, because you're like, even though you're like, oh, I make this much money and now I make a little bit more with my cash flow. You're like, really? Can I leave though? Because, something happens that's not quite big enough for insurance. That's all on me. I didn't make any money this month. How am I going to pay my mortgage in Canada?
Yep.
So anyway, there's my long rant.
I have a question for you. So it's interesting because we're talking about how the podcasts and everything were and still are, but were very, very U.S. focused. And yet you look at the Toll Brothers or something like that, where they're doing these flips of these beautiful homes. Where are all of those homes? In Toronto, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of amazing when all of these when they're taking people around and looking at homes and flipping them and everything, half of those are in Canada because of the way the Canadian market is, but yet the real estate investing opportunities are here in the US. And on that note, you, unlike most people, give away your training, which you won't be doing for long, but tell us how that looks. I don't think you will.
Yeah, so we do a weekly show, and basically, like I think last week's show, we literally just talked about was it subject to, or like a subject, right? We like talked about a certain kind of financing. Oh no, short sales. We talked about short sales, what they are, how you do them, where you find them, how you negotiate with the things, and we'll just cover a subject. Sometimes I interview people, totally free. It's on the podcast. But if you want one-on-one coaching, what I usually say is buy something with me, right? Because it's free. Then people go, well, how much do you charge for coaching? And they're like,
so let's just interrupt you. When he says buy something with me, it doesn't mean buy a coaching package like
yes,
right? It means buy a property with Glen, joint venture, and you're going to learn as you go through the process. So, and he's going to give you the extra value of his knowledge and experience because you're partnering with him. So you're going to benefit from Glen's knowledge and experience and training at all connected with the opportunity to also make money on a joint venture that he's vetted. So if he's vetted it, that's all of his experience coupled with yours. And also then you're going to get access to the financing because Glen has access more so than the first time investor.
Yes, like exactly that. So you'll get a better financing loan product. We will do likely either a flip or a perfect burr will be the goal. And to get your money back so that you can decide to do another one with me, or you can go do it yourself afterwards. And people are like, well, why don't you just coach me? And I'm like, so instead of paying like 20,000 for a house and we do the whole thing, or 50,000 or whatever it is, you'd rather just pay it to me and not get anything back. I'm like, this way you get the house, and even if we flipped it, like, and we'll make 20 grand each. And
so it still comes back to fear of getting your feet wet, fear of that first investment. What is stopping you from taking the leap? And the reality is that when you have a partner like the people I bring on my show, like Glen, who really has been there and done that and has has written various books, but has the pedigree, the experience to prove that. Like the reality is Glen, so I was on Glen's show right before I went on the marketers cruise. It was January.
Okay.
Right? The end of January. I remember it was like very early in the morning and I was like completely out of it. The background, my background wasn't good. It was kind of before coronavirus. So we weren't I wasn't as much of a Zoom expert as I am now. And yet still, because of Glen's following, at least once every other week, I get a call from somebody that says, I saw you on Glen's show. I saw you on Glen's show, because Glen has a following. And it's important to know that, because that will also help you. It's like anything, I don't want to go into business with somebody who's never been in business before. I don't want to be coached by a coach who's never run a business before. I don't want to invest in real estate with somebody who's never invested in real estate before. I'm a lawyer and I'm a realtor and I'm an investor. The reality is that not just because you're a realtor doesn't mean you can be a good investor. And just because you're an investor doesn't mean you can be a good finder of opportunities. Glen is all of those things. And because of that, he brings a huge amount of value to what you're doing. And for me, I would rather give 20,000 to Glen and have a return on my investment at the end and get the coaching than to just give the 20,000 to Glen. Like I've done so many years for business coaches, 30,000 a year. Thank you very much. And said, at the end of the day, I got nothing to show for it except maybe a new CRM that I also paid money for, So it's a brilliant model. And Glen, tell us, so if you don't mind, I'd love to talk with you a little bit about what made you decide. And again, this is completely up to you. What made you decide that you wanted to actually get a visa? Why did you decide that you needed or wanted an E2 treaty investor visa?
So the original one was I was trying to get financing, and in all honesty, we're dealing mostly with these corporate loans or hard money loans, and the interest rates aren't good.
High rates, right?
Higher rates, right? High setup fees, because those you're paying people for this. And like, just to give full disclosure, usually when you start, you're probably paying 7.5. I'm down to about 6 now because of the experience, but it's more expensive money. And I originally was banking with Royal Bank in the United States down in Georgia, and I switched to a local bank in Huntsville, Alabama, and mostly because I wanted to get onto their shortlist. I found that when you buy state money or properties in the States, you get a HUD statement, and often you can see who is on both sides. You can see where their loans are. And I was buying some very cheap properties, and who was the bank on it? The bank that I now bank with. So I wanted to get in touch with them. So once I switched my banking over there and building a relationship, keeping lots of money in the account, make sure they're very happy with me. And then I talked to them. I said, so what's the criteria if I want to be able to get these really low value loans, and what kind of interest rates and what kind of things could I do? And basically they said, well, if you could get your social security number, then we could lend to you through Fannie. And with that, the program they have, they would do 90% loan to value on purchases and 80 to 85 on cash out refis, which may not sound like a lot, but that is really high in the United States.
Right, exactly. Especially for a Canadian.
Yes. And then the rates would go way down. They were saying 3%, 3.5%, 4%, depending on some things. So if I could get my social security number and build a FICO score of at least, I think they said 650 or 700.
Yeah, 650 at least.
Yeah, in that range anyway. Then I could get into these loan programs. So the next thing was, how do I get a social security number? And I went Googling away on the internet. And how you do it is the E2 visa, the HB1. You know what? You're better on this is your domain. E2 is where I went, but there is, when we talked on my show, I think you talked about 5 different visas.
Yeah, but it's called alphabet soup.
Yeah. But basically, by getting this E2 visa, which you're creating a new business, or at least you're creating a business in the United States, and you're creating jobs for Americans through the program over a 3-year period. 5-year period. You can you can get access to a social security number, a working visa, so you can go to the States. Like right now, if I went to there, I'm technically shouldn't be picking up a hammer and working on anything.
Correct.
I am a passive investor the way I am right now. But if, as I had an E2 visa, it would open me up to having a more active role in the thing.
100%.
Not that I would necessarily want the active role, but it would also give me ability to live there.
Right.
I'd have, yeah, I could stay longer than, I don't remember the exact number, 5 months or whatever that a Canadian can go there. I could stay longer than my term. I can cross the border and have working visas, a lot streamlined to go back and forth.
So your goal is not necessarily to move here, right? It's just to have that flexibility, right?
Right. It's the lending and it's the flexibility. Yeah.
So there's 2 visas that is really that I focus on that really allow you that flexibility, the E1 and the E2. And my client who just posted yesterday about this, and he got his visa last Tuesday, did an E1, and he's in Calgary, and he has no plans to move here. His kids play hockey. He doesn't want to live in the States, and he's not a real estate investor. He's a business owner. He's a joint venture expert, but not in real estate. But, joint ventures are joint ventures. But he does usually, outside of COVID, because all of this is, COVID, not kind of COVID sensitive. He does most of his events and makes a big bulk of his income from his U.S. operations. So we got him this visa because the last thing you want is to be stopped in your tracks when you're going to potentially check out a property, invest in a property, sign documents, run an event, create business relationships, set up meetings, do closings, and all of this. So the beautiful thing about the E2 is that it's a very, really inexpensive way of accessing, like Glenn said, this social security number, the better credit, the favorable terms, the opportunity to potentially live here if you want, and to pick up a hammer and make money, and also not be treated, and this is a good thing for most Canadians, as a resident of the US. So it's not a green card. And the beauty of that is FACTA and all the tax things that happen if you become a US resident. Suddenly it's your worldwide income and all of this. So it's a very smart strategy for somebody that is investing in the US and wants that flexibility. And I don't promote it only for people, and most people don't realize this, that want to move here. It's a lot more than that. And so it's, I give you kudos because you're an outside of the box thinker, because most people are like, well, what do I need a visa for? And it's really exactly what Glenn said. It's because you're going to get access to such better terms, more favorable terms in 98% of what you're doing down here, and it's not going to negatively impact you in Canada. So and
they're going to treat you more. You're going to get more of the loan programs and other programs that Americans would get.
Correct.
And it would go both ways. If you're American joining to Canada,
correct.
If you came here, you would be left out of a lot of the stuff until you had the proper visas to be able to buy stuff. Because I've heard the other side, they're like, oh, you're Canadian, I'm American, how do I do this in Canada?
And that's going to become a very big deal going forward.
Yeah.
And the E2 is actually a bilateral visa, as is the E1. They're both bilateral. So even though it's not called the same thing, the visa is equally available to Americans that are investing in Canada, or maybe that want to move there. I wonder why. We won't talk about politics. But anyway, it's an interesting time here in the US. And actually, the podcast is launching the day after the election. So your show will be probably live right then, because I'm putting a few in the pre-launch phase.
Cool.
Glenn, do you have anything else that you'd like to share, other than the fact that, of course, I'd love you to share your Facebook group where people can go and follow you and join the group and learn. So tell us a bit about how they can reach you, please.
Sure. My email is glenn@glensutherland.com with one
That's
N.
one N.
Yeah, one N. I get the two N's all the time. I get missed emails. It's not my fault.
Not his fault.
Yeah, or the podcast or YouTube channel. So it's YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, basically everything. And you can find me there, where like I said, we teach stuff every week, or you get to listen to a story. And sometimes the stories actually can teach you a lot too, because you can learn from other mistakes that you might not want to make those mistakes. Yeah, or you hear about a good thing, someone will drop a name or of some sort of crazy lender or something. There might be some tidbits that you can pull out as stories as well. You can learn just as much from those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do have a Facebook group. I honestly am not even sure what it's called. Is it Canadian Investing in the US?
It is.
Or not?
It's
No,
Canadian Investing in the US.
No, it's slightly different because we keep changing the name on it. But anyway, it's something like that. If you message me, you can find it.
One is called Canadian Investors, I think, and then Glenn's is
Canada US investing. I don't know. It's something like that. We've changed the name like a dozen times, but it's out there. If you type in Canada and US, and you'll probably find it. Yes. I think we added the name real estate to it because that was the one problem with my podcast. It doesn't have the word real estate in it. Wow. So a lot of people don't understand that it's actually a real estate show.
Makes sense. Well, thank you for taking some time to be with us. I appreciate it. It's great to call you a friend. I look forward to helping you on your journey and to working with some of your joint venture partners and others. And anybody that's interested, please do what do you call it? Please do register for. How do you say?
Track you down.
Please do sign up for the podcast and make sure subscribe. That's the word. Okay.
Yes. Like and subscribe.
For me today. Please subscribe to our podcast as well as Glenn's, and it's called Investing Across Borders. Our focus is definitely on Canada-U.S. investors, although not exclusively. I am an immigration lawyer, both in Canada and the U.S., as well as a corporate lawyer and a realtor, and love working with people that think outside of the box, like Mr. Glen Sutherland. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day, and stay safe. That is the most important message that we all have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.